Okay, so now, let me first tell you about the handout. It's what we promised on one side of the paper topics, but isn't exactly what we promised because it's the paper topics as far as we were able to get them up to now. We will give you more paper topics on Thursday to cover the last part of basic questions about mood and disposition, as it's called, and also the way back into the ground of metaphysics. I'll tell you about where the status of that is in a minute. But this is enough to give you, for one thing, a lot of good questions. There's enough to write a paper on in the origin of the work of art. There's enough to write a book on in the origin of the work of art. So, and we've got those questions laid out here for you. And that gives you a sense also of the kind of question. Of course, it's better if you come up with your own question, because then it'll be your own, really what puzzles and concerns you, what problem you're trying to find an answer for. But if you do come up with your own question, clear it with your TA, because we want to make sure that it's a question that will lead you to something interesting, if possible. And otherwise, here are these samples, and more will be on the way. And these are on the website, and so is the syllabus on the website. Now, looking at the syllabus, I can explain further what's going on. I've changed things around. I see we're going to spend longer on basic questions, and it's a good thing, too, because the way back into the ground of metaphysics is in the reader, and the reader was supposed to be available today, but the people in Copy Central put it in the wrong stack or something, and when I went over to get it at noon, they hadn't even started it yet, so now they're feeling very guilty, and they promised to have it ready by Thursday. But obviously, I can't talk about it on Thursday. So I'm one ahead of the website. The website says we're doing the way back into the ground of metaphysics starting Thursday. In fact, we're still on basic questions starting Thursday. We'll get to the way back into the ground of metaphysics next Tuesday. And that's all the further we're going to write paper topics. For it seems that you shouldn't be writing a paper topic on something like the Age of the World picture, which we're reading right up to the day before the papers are due, or that doesn't make much sense. So the idea will be that the Age of the World picture will be something that you will be one of the paper topics in the next paper. And this also makes sense in a way that you can't see very well yet, but I can sort of tell you. That means that the first paper is on these sort of meta questions. What Heidegger thinks philosophy is, what he thinks thinkers are, what he thinks has been thought, and what he thinks are done in philosophy, and what he thinks has to be done, and why, and so forth. You're getting used to that, I hope. Then all the rest. Then we turn to his story about the history of the West. So the Age of the World picture is about the beginning of modernity, and the question concerning technology is about where our current understanding of being. Then we turn to Heidegger's attempt to say what we should do about it, and then we get the things thinking and so forth. So it makes sense to group the Age of the World picture with the question concerning technology as his story about there's a longer story and a lot more detail about the history of being from the pre-Socratics, the history of the various truths of being, or the various understandings of being, or the various styles in the West, from the pre-Socratics up to us. But we're going to hit the high points. We're going to have the Greeks, then we're going to have the moderns, then we're going to have us. So the readers should be ready on Thursday to be read. It's only about 15 pages long, the way back into the ground of metaphysics. Any questions about all these procedural remarks before we get down to the substantive stuff? You might have, and I really mean it. I'm going to pause a minute, because there may be something we've overlooked in laying this out and putting this on the website. Anything? It's all clear to you? Okay, great.
Actually, let me...
Yeah, maybe...
More study questions on the web. Look at them. We'll talk about it.
Good. Okay. Yeah, Liz has got good questions. Hard, deep, fundamental, important questions for you to think about. And it should be a lot easier to get on the web now. We might mention that. I complained last time and Jennifer, who's the woman in charge of the web, a different Jennifer than you may have had as a TA in Cyril's course, Jennifer Gewirtz. Anyway, Jennifer got a better link to the page where the streaming audio, real audio is, so you don't have to go through all that junk and advertising trying to find out how to get your free download your free audio decoder. You now can get it in a hurry, and I think it's pretty clear now. Does anybody have any trouble getting on the web at this point? I think we finally got that problem solved. People tell me it's a big help and lots of fun to listen to the lectures on the web, right? I hope so, and it makes you happy, because we're making a pitch to get more money to do it in more courses, so everybody, your happiness is valuable right now. Okay, back to where we are, I think. Let me just look at my notes to see if I told you all the things I need to tell you. Yes, okay. So, let me go back to productive seeing for a little bit. It's a kind, how we put this? It's certainly a kind of bringing forth, he says, on 76. Whenever I see bringing forth, I think of what he later will make clear, that's this notion of poesis that I use every once in a while. He's talking about it on 76 at the fifth line. When we today speak of bringing forth, we think of the making or fabricating of an individual object. That's not what he's thinking about. Remember I said real bringing forth is what the old carpenters did. They didn't just bang together a chest. They let the wood bring it forth. We'll hear about this again in very interesting in the Reader, in the Borgmann part. He's found somebody to interview who is an old-fashioned carriage maker who really understands poesis. The essence is brought out from its previous obscurity and hiddenness. You see, that's the sort of form in the wood. Forth into what? Into the light. It's brought into view. And then you get here that this is a peculiar kind of seeing, and it's not just a staring. It draws something forth. It doesn't just notice it, and it puts it in front of you and makes it visible for you, and that's this Ersehen in German, this way of letting something show up. Maybe that's what it really amounts to. It's because productive seeing isn't very illuminating as a phrase or as a translation. Let's say that what he's talking about here is what lets or helps. I guess it's not just lets, helps something show up for you. And how does it do that? Well, it produces an exemplar. And then you can see everything in the light of the exemplar. And his example is that you see, you can have an exemplary house, and then you see, and once you get this sort of exemplary paradigm house, then you can understand any particular house and any things in particular houses by seeing how they fit in and relate to the exemplary house. You see it in the light of it, as he puts it. Back here. I already have a reference to this. Maybe I should just be patient and I will find it anyway. But I thought I would jump to it. Then I couldn't jump to it.
Are you looking for the first
house? In the light of. I'm looking for that phrase about where's the first house? Maybe it's back there. Maybe it's back there. I'm wondering, you see it there?
Yeah. And it's at the bottom of that page.
When we enter a house and live in it, we constantly have house in sight, houseness. If this were not seen, we couldn't experience and enter the stairs and so forth. It doesn't actually...
Like 5 lines from the bottom, I think.
Oh yeah, right. The essence is what something is, and we encounter what it is as that which we constantly have in sight. Where is in the light of?
Only in the light of what is seen in advance and constantly, yet not explicitly observed.
I can't see that.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines from the bottom.
Of what?
56.
Oh, no wonder I can't see it. I'm on 58. Okay, now I see it perfectly well. At the bottom of 56. Okay. And now, then I said, and this is where I want to just both defend what I said and take back some misleading impression I seem to have left. I said it's like a mini work of art. And why did I say that? The house exemplar, the house idea. Why is it like a mini work of art? Well, it's the most perspicuous version of a house, paradigm house, and we act, that is, relate to other houses in the light of it, and that all sounds exactly like the work of art. It shines, and we relate to everything in the light of it, or the Kuhnian paradigm shines, and everybody does their science in the light of it. But I even found new evidence for my view, which I want to state, because Liz challenged me in a very sensible way, particularly knowing more later Heidegger. She said, yeah, but this can't be like a work of art because he says about the idea on 77 that it's positive. And posited is a kind of code word in later Heidegger, later than this, for something that only moderns do. You'll see it in the Age of the World picture, where positing something means we willfully sort of give it a meaning. And it doesn't, and certainly that's not how the work of art is, because the work of art, Liz was rightly thinking, is something that the creator is receptive to the meanings going on in the culture. He doesn't posit the work of art, one would think. But it turns out that if you go back to the origin of the work of art, which I did, just to find out, he does use positing in a different way at this stage in his thinking. And the work of art is posited on 61 of the origin of the work of art. He says, I'll read a little, give you context. There must always be some being in the open, something that is in which the openness takes its stand and attains its constancy. In taking possession thus of the openness holds open the open and sustains it. Setting and taking possession are everywhere drawn from the Greek sense of thesis, which means setting up in the unconcealed. Well, thesis in Greek he translates as setzen in German. Not that this is important, except to get this straight. And that gets translated as posit. So it turns out the creator posits the work of art. And therefore, it's not surprising, and it's sort of evidence for thinking, of the idea, the eidos, which Plato is saying that this productive seeing, this is a kind of positing. So it's the same word, setzen, in both cases. And one more way that it's like a work of art, the idea, is it needs preservers. Remember, the work of art only works because people are in there seeing things in that way and acting in the ways that it makes sense to act, given the particular work of art. Well, you could see, of course, that there'd be something similar. The house paradigm is sustained by the people who relate to the houses in the light of that paradigm. This is on the last paragraph of the section on 78. The knowledge of the essence, therefore, if it is to be shared, must itself be accomplished anew by the one who is to assume it. More precisely, it cannot be communicated in the sense of passing on of a proposition whose content is grasped without its foundation and its acquisition being accomplished again. The knowledge of the essence must be accomplished anew by each one who is to share it. It must genuinely be co-accomplished. That makes sense, because remember, you can't rationalize it. You can't state it in propositions. You can't pin it down and say, okay, this is what it is. You can only act in the name of it. The only thing you can do with a paradigm house is relate to houses in terms of it. You can't sort of, remember this again for works of art, you can't summarize what it means and then get rid of the thing and then just use these rules or methods. It would be like have a house schema, cognitivist like, instead of it. You can't replace the paradigm house with a house schema, and you can't replace the paradigm in Kuhn with a methodology, and therefore you preserve it in acting in terms of it and seeing in terms of it. So far, those are all ways it's like a mini work of art, an eidos is, the house thing is. But of course, and it was obvious to me, but I should have said it, there is very important ways, two very important ways, it's not like a work of art. let's just see who, I mean, somebody say something. In what way would the Platonic idea, this sort of paradigm you have, this kind of image of the object in its most perspicuous, why isn't that like a work of art? Yeah. It's what? Exactly. One point. It isn't a thing, which will mean, importantly, that it doesn't have any earth, which will mean that it's sort of all clear and all sort of visible. But in general, it's just not a thing. And work of art is a thing, and it's made out of stuff, and it has earth. Okay, that's one of them. And what's the other? So obvious that you almost can't see it. What does a work of art do that the idea of a house can't do?
It stops working.
That's important. That's important, but that's relative to the thing I'm trying to say. What does it do when it is working?
Opens up a world.
Exactly. Good. You two have got it. So, you can't say, of course, that the image or the paradigm or the eidos of the house opens up a world. All it does is open up this little mini activity of dealing with houses. So in those two very important ways, it's not like a work of art. Okay. But both the eidos and the work of art have the same way of being, which is physis. Both of them come forth, emerge, and thereby I'm seeing into something interesting that I hadn't realized. They both preserve truth by disclosing. That's the physis story is that unconcealing takes place, to talk in this translation. Unconcealing takes place in the work of art, and unconcealing takes place when anything comes into the world in this physis sort of way, shows up. Physis, remember, means emerging, showing up, stabilizing, and so forth. They both have this coming in to the world and showing up. But I see this deep difference, but I don't want to talk about it yet. What? Go ahead.
Well, I don't know.
Maybe
but there's a way, I mean, don't all things, all beings come
Yes,
into being?
that's right.
What's
That's
different
right.
about
No big deal, right. They've all got this disclosing character, because physis is the understanding of being at this period in 5th century. So the works of art are understood in that way, and have that mode of being, and so are the ideas. Yes, I didn't mean that.
But so are
everything. So are trees. So is everything. Right. No, it's no big deal. Liz is right. They all come forth and emerge.
But there's still something interesting and special that work of art and eidos have in common in a physis understanding of being that not everything has.
Well, yes, and let's talk about that. They both enable everything else to show up and emerge as something. The work of art enables everything to show up as created or as whatever. I mean, in this case, sort of a kind of circular. They enable everything else to show up as emerging. But because they focus the style of emerging. That is the work of art, temples. But even the house thing enables houses to show up as houses, and doors to show up as doors, and stairs to show up as stairs. So both of them are something like, not only do they show up, but they enable showing up. Is that what you have in mind?
Right, yeah.
Good.
But then why don't they set up little worlds?
Well, it's interesting. They do and they don't. And why is that? Well, I mean, my clue is it's not a particular style of house that they are trying, that the house idea shows up. And what does that mean? It still lets things show up as doors and windows, and that lets things show up as something. But there's two different as somethings in here. This has been around in the background for a while. I don't think I've ever said it. In Being and Time, which is what the house story is like, you let doors show up as doors, and stairs show up as stairs. I'm just following Heidegger's example. But at this higher, and that's what it does. But the work of art lets things show up as created, or lets things show up as objects, or lets things show up as bursting forth and emerging. And that the style as, is what they don't do. Okay. And that's got to do with meaningful differences too, I think. I mean, whereas the style tells you the difference between saints and sinners, between mature and immature, between heroes and slaves. Remember, it gives you what it makes sense to do and what it's bad to do. The house thing doesn't do that. It doesn't set up guidelines for how people should live. And in that sense, too, it's not a mini world. Okay, good. Yeah, Forrest.
I just want to register a slight humor about the creator positing the work of art. It's ins werk setzen. And this notion that we have of setting the truth to work, that's the setzen. But I don't think that's the same as positing anyway.
It's the same word as the positing gets translated positing. Are you disagreeing with the translation?
Well, I'm not sure. I don't have.
It's always thesis in Greek, he says, Heidegger.
Yeah, but the point is translating this as positing. I mean, I think this is a bad thing. Now, if it's setting it to work, which is what begins to...
I think that's right.
Then we have to do something else with it, because, and I think he may mean really posit in this case, in this one.
No, I think probably not even there is it really positing. In positing in the sense of placing before, in this strong sense of positing, we're not going to get till modernity. I think he says it's the same Greek word thesis, and he seems to think it has the same meaning, and the meaning is, I think it's good to say, setting to work of the house or of the work of art. He says that it's a thesis which gets related to hypothesis, which comes before. Remember, both the work of art and here's another similarity. Both the work and the house are a priori in the sense that they're full, but they come before all the stuff that they make show up.
But then you're going to get to hypokamenon, which is... That's
right. Well,
that's not good.
Well, I wonder. I was going to get to hypokamenon. It's a hypothesis of what? Of the hypokamenon, which underlies or grounds what goes on. We're getting the same sort of regressive ambiguity.
But that's his substance again.
Okay.
Aristotelian substance.
It could be, but then doesn't he think that hypokamenon, you'd have to go back and look, had a non-Aristotelian meaning already as what underlies and grounds?
Yeah, I'd have to look at it.
Okay.
I don't think he did.
Well,
but I wouldn't want to say that the creator posits the truth of the work of art.
No, I wouldn't either.
Oh, okay.
Okay, but that's the word. Just let's get clear. The same word, this setzen, which gets translated positing, is what he says the creator does this, setzen, in the origin of the work of art. That's the thing. That's what I looked up in the German and was amazed to discover. So, and setzen gets translated positing. So, I mean, I'll tell you the page.
Do you have a passage where it says the creator posits?
Yes, I'll tell you the page.
Which is it?
86.
Of this. But then I'll tell you about where it is in the German.
Okay.
86? Of what?
Basic questions.
Oh, no, I want origin.
He wants to know about origin.
Where it says the creator posits.
Yeah, on page 61 of us, we hear about thesis. And in the German, on page 48 of Ursprung des Kunstwerks, we've got thesis, we've got setting and taking possession as setzen, which is the same word that gets in basic problems translated positing. That's what causes this problem.
Okay, it's just, as I said, this is Inswerk setzen, not creator or sets the work of art.
Well, now we have to look at the German.
That's what I mean.
Okay, let's look at the setzen. Nobody has a German of Holzweg, I'm sure. We'll look. That would be, then I have to take back my taking back. Okay, then we'll see. It would be nice. I hope Forrest turns out to be right, because it makes me nervous that the same word, and that's what Liz was saying, he shouldn't say that the three things. He shouldn't equate the way the creator sets into work a work of art, the way Plato sees our productive seeing, enabling us to have these paradigms in which we then can make sense of each thing. with the way in modernity people have hypotheses and posit whole understandings of things out of their heads, so to speak. Those sound like very different activities. It's a little unfortunate that he's only got one German word, and maybe he doesn't.
It also sounds bad that we have productive seeing, that we're producing this thing, as opposed to the thing itself, or the thing producing this for us.
Yeah, well, it's supposed to. Well, it's supposed to be something that's the poiesis component. It doesn't just emerge. If it weren't for our activity, there wouldn't be these paradigms.
And yet we don't produce it.
Well, not out of our heads and not with our willpower, right. We bring it forth. That's right. We don't produce it. Okay. No, we don't produce it. I see. So productive seeing is misleading.
Oh, I think
right.
that's a terrible
Production, just to be clear, I see why Forrest is worried about that. When you know the rules of the game, production is something that doesn't get understood till Aristotle. Aristotle is a big guy for production. And techne in Aristotle is the way you produce things. And pretty soon in Roman thinking, what you produce is just a finished work. I mean, here's the difference between the cabinet maker who lets the chest come forth out of the wood, and I said just sort of the hat carpenter who just puts it together. But thinking of a different example, I think for the Romans, sort of the paradigm kind of thing is just a brick. I mean, you don't let the brick come forth out of the mud. You produce it. You put the form on the matter, and then there's a brick, and it just lies there, as Heidegger puts it, as a finished work. And that's what production is, brick making. But so Forrest is right. The picture in Plato is of how these ideas are drawn forth by us is not a production, not bang, we put the form on the mud and there's a brick. Good. Right. We agree. Yeah.
That footnote, when they use the word productive seeing, is helpful. I agree that production is a weighted word and it's bad, but they do mention that it's producere from the Latin.
Lead out.
Is to lead.
Good.
Pro is for, so to lead forth. So
good.
Think about it in those terms.
Okay, and that's like producing a witness, as they say, where you don't sort of produce a witness the way you produce a chest or a brick. You somehow turn this person into a witness by the way you question them. There's interesting sociobiological, not sociology
Latin,
on that.
But
what?
going to Latin for Heidegger is not the way to go. That's not what Aristean means with a dash.
True.
It has nothing to do with producere.
Okay, as long as we're getting all this, trying to straighten it out, what is the German word for production? That when he says that Aristotle is into production, because that would be important. I mean, we need a word there. I wonder what it is. We have to find out. It won't be Erzean, I grant you, and it won't help that in Latin production means. What's his German? I wonder.
The German, not for production, but for Erzean means original seeing.
Okay.
That's what it means.
Original seeing or originating seeing, maybe.
Could be, yeah, because that's the air is the UR, the UR is the Ursprung.
Oh, good. Well, that's
and
nice.
it's a dash. I mean, he specifically spells it with a dash, which just takes it totally out of this dimension.
Okay. Well, look up two things. Help remember this. We want to look at the setting into work, which is Setzen, and see if it looks different somehow in context than positing. And secondly, we want to know what his word is in German for production in Aristotle. Okay, we're ready to go on? Did you want to say something, John? Okay, then we're going to go on. Let's see. So we get to the point we were about here at the last lecture, where the Greeks had this sense that aletheia, unconcealing, was the right name for truth. And this is all on 86 and 87. On 86, he says, at the last full paragraph, a being, and of course it's a being, you've got to always, in its beingness, is briefly and properly the unconcealedness of the being itself. For a moment I thought maybe it was brief, but that just means in short, clearly. I had a happy moment of hallucination there. Beings determined. See, Well, you'll see in a minute why I would like that. Anyway, beings determined with respect to their unconcealedness are grasped with respect to their coming forth and emerging, their physis, that is, as idea, and so are grasped as nothing other than beings in their beingness. Okay, so the coming into unconcealedness of something is both the way we are able to encounter it, the way it shows up. It is what makes possible our being able to say correct things about it. So naturally we can think of this as the most basic kind of truth. Truth is, for the Greeks, then we're back to that, unconcealing. And unconcealing is what happens every time anything shows up. And the general characteristic of everything that is that it shows up. So physis turns out to be the name of everything, and it means unconcealing, and therefore it can be equated with aletheia, which means unconcealing. So truth and coming forth or showing up are together. And since the Greeks have understood everything as showing up, they can that equals unconcealing, and that makes sense to them to use that word for truth. Did I make that clear? Not really. I understand that better than I said it. Let me try again. For a being to be true, I guess we have to go the other way around, the way he does. Before you can make true statements about something in the sense of corresponding, the thing has got to already be showing up, be in the open, be unconcealed. So the most basic kind of truth, I'm going to have to explain that to you, I can see that. Heidegger's got a hidden premise in there, which I was trying to do an end run around, but I can't. Why would you want to call, I talked about this once, I think, the condition of the possibility of truth as correspondence or correctness itself a kind of truth? Why should showing up be truth? Well, he thinks that there is a basic sort of principle that what makes the condition of the possibility of X is primordial X. That means what makes truth as correctness possible is primordial truth. I mean, I think if you don't put that premise in there, you can't understand any of this. The Greeks, who sensed that showing up made propositions and their correctness possible, they saw that was, so to speak, the most basic kind of truth, the thing that made all truth in the correspondence sense possible. And therefore it seemed normal to them to describe the showing up of something as unconcealing, and to use that word as the name for truth. That's the best I can do it. Can you do it better? You look like you maybe...
Just a little bit on the notion of the truth. What he's saying is that truth is not something we have, that we produce, or that we have in mind, or that we find. Rather, truth has to do with the being that shows up. It shows what it is. That is the truth of what it is in its showing up.
Okay, well, that is a help. That is a help. So I'm going to get that. So it shows, when it shows up, it shows what it is.
And that's the truth.
So its unconcealedness is the truth about it.
That's it.
Is it showing the truth about itself?
Right.
I like that.
We don't do it, or we
Okay.
don't have it,
Okay.
although we are a part of it.
And when it shows that, that's better than my story. My story isn't wrong. It just seemed too tortured and strange. Okay, so when something shows up, it shows the truth about itself. It shows what it is. And when it shows what it is, then we can make true statements about it. Those true statements are up to us. But we couldn't make true statements about it if it hadn't already shown itself as something. And that seems right. And that's very close to being in time. Remember, where those of you who've read it, first you've got the truth is making statements about something that correspond to Never mind. No.
Pointing it out as it is.
Pointing it out, I couldn't remember. Yes, pointing it out as it is correspondence, the way Heidegger understands it. Pointing it out as it is wouldn't be possible if it didn't show up as it is. And that's what Forrest is saying.
But I think this is a different truth from being in time, where Dasein is in the truth. And the truth that it has is the interpretation that we give it, i.e., whether it's Vorhandenheit, Zuhandenheit, and it shows up within our projects as what's...
Well, don't even talk about it. Too many people don't know.
Okay, I'm sorry, but at any rate...
Right, no, I don't even... Let me... If what I'm saying is crude, it's necessarily crude for this. It won't hurt anything.
Okay.
Anybody else want to say anything? Yes.
Just a question. So when something comes into the world before we recognize it, is its truth not already there before our recognition of it? And it's so in a way whether or not we recognize it? And then there's a sort of secondary truth, which is it showing up for us.
No, I don't think, but I mean, I'll see what other people think. Showing up is for us. I mean, the idea that something there'd be no us, but things are showing up anyway. A rose blooms out there and there aren't any human beings yet. The rose isn't showing up. I don't think so. Yeah.
Well, it's certainly the rose can bloom and do all its things without any of us happening to be anywhere near it.
Absolutely. But if it weren't for there being a human world, the notion of the rose showing up wouldn't make any sense.
Yeah.
There would just be a bunch of states of the universe following them one after another.
But given that we have an understanding of being, we can make sense of things happening outside of our...
That's right. Once we have this notion of showing up, and that's maybe what you're getting at, then we can make the notion we can have the notion of things showing up where nobody's around to see them showing up.
But it wouldn't have a truth apart from it showing up. It has to have a truth.
That's right, but it doesn't need any... It isn't as if a rose shows up in the forest and nobody happens to see it, that it doesn't have any truth, it seems to me. Once we've got the whole notion that things come out into openness and reveal, so to speak, what they are...
But it's not showing up if it's not showing up to some...
You mean there has to be somebody actually standing there? When I turn my back on the rose, its truth goes away?
No, not when you turn your back on it.
Right.
But if
there were no human beings.
No one for whom it showed up, if there were no human beings for it to show up to, it couldn't show its truth.
Well, that's what Liz said. But we want to say, but that we don't want to make this mean that it would stop showing up as what it was if it happened that in the life of this particular rose, no human being ever passed that way. Okay, well that's all we wanted to say. Okay, and that's what was worrying you. Yes, we got it straight. Okay, so I mean on 86 we just read something and got that about physis. Where at the bottom of the page, physis emergence, there belongs to beings as such aletheia unconcealableness. We were just explaining how that all seemed to fit together to the Greeks. And then he says, at the bottom of 91, of course ironically, but you got to, since Heidegger's not normally ironic, I got to, any more than normally he's making jokes, you should of course beware, and you probably are, that he's saying, well then, then the Greeks must have had it all figured out about truth and aletheia. We just, thanks to Forrest's help there, got it said very clearly that things show up as they are, and when they reveal or unconceal or disclose what they are, that's the basic kind of truth. And so the Greeks have got it all figured out, he says at the bottom of 91. The Greeks have already worked out exactly what we've been trying to take up as the more original and necessary task of future philosophical inquiry. There's nothing left for Heidegger to do, it turns out. The Greeks had it all. And then, of course, that's ironic. It turns out, and I've already hinted at this, they are right about beings. They got it right that beings have the general characteristic of physis, which means showing up, and that is aletheia because that reveals what they are, and that makes saying true things about them possible. They got all that, but what they didn't understand was, to put it as sort of clearly and bluntly as I can, how come there could be this understanding of beings as showing up? I mean, that is itself something that they should be wondering about. After all, they don't know this, but for the Christians things aren't understood. All of them as showing up. For people in Egypt, presumably, they weren't understood as showing up. They have taken physis just for granted and gone on from there. But the interesting question is, how come there was a unified style of everything, namely physis, namely showing up, welling up, emerging, and all that. How was that possible? What's entailed in that? That's what they should have interrogated, or not should have. I mean, they had enough to do, but that's what they left uninterrogated, and for very essential reasons. It turns out they couldn't have done what they were doing if they had had that problem too. He says, one thing at a time, and these two problems are sort of conjugate variables. You can't pay attention to the beings and their beingness, and at the same time pay attention to the clearing, which is making it possible for beings to have any kind of general style. So the clearing is making it possible for everything to show up as physis, or the being of beings, to be physis. That's a certain possible way, a style of a certain kind of world. And they're studying that. They're busy looking at the beings and with amazement and wonder and philosophical reflection, seeing that they're all showing up and revealing themselves, and that's terrific. But the question sort of, why are all the beings doing anything at all of them, and why are all of the beings doing that, namely showing up? Those two questions they can't even think about. They've got their hands full or their minds full. That's the next story. This is on 98. What they didn't get, I'm going to read this whole paragraph, what they got and what they didn't get. That's the big paragraph on 98. When the Greeks took up aletheia as the ground of correctness, did they thereby posit this ground as ground, and did they ground it as such? All this is, that is, did they understand what they were up to or not when they just, they didn't sit back and decide, so to speak, to name this aletheia, to say that physis was the general characteristic of all beings, and that is truth because beings are showing up as they are. That's just the way their language worked. They had some kind of sense of that, but they didn't posit it. They didn't think about it. They didn't, in some jargon that may or may not be helpful, thematize it, notice it. In the jargon of this, interrogate it. Furthermore, assuming they grounded the unconcealedness of beings as the ground of correctness, is this ground itself, aletheia, in its essence, sufficiently determined and questioned? The answer is, of course, no. That's a job left for Heidegger. Did the Greeks ever interrogate aletheia as such? Did they deem the unconcealedness of beings as such worthy of questioning? Well, it isn't that they said, gee, it's trivial and not worthy of questioning. They just didn't think about it. The Greeks experienced the essence of truth as unconcealedness. Does that mean, without further ado, that for them this very unconcealedness was worthy of questioning? By no means. The Greeks once experienced the unconcealedness of being and took it up as truth, and on this ground they determined truth as correctness and posited this ground and grounded it, but they did not go further and explicitly interrogate unconcealedness itself. Aletheia remained for them unquestioned. Their thinking did not penetrate further into aletheia as such, and they did not fathom it explicitly in its essence. Instead, they merely stood under the force of the emerging but still furled essence of truth as unconcealedness. Well, that sums that up pretty clearly. And now the interesting thing is that he hints, and I'll read you the hints. Until next lecture, we can't go into what they are. He hints that this is disastrous. It's not a stupid mistake for lots of reasons we'll hear more about, that they had their hands full, they did their job, but it was disastrous. He says at the bottom of 58, 10 lines up, nevertheless, Plato provided an answer about truth, which became henceforth perhaps the most consequential, influential, and disastrous philosophical definition in Western thinking. And that's when he got to this idea of that the essence of things was this eidos, and this eidos was what you could see in advance, as it says at the top of 59, and then see everything else in terms of. That was disastrous. Now, we don't know why yet. On 61, he says more about it.
Just to add one thing to it.
Yeah.
It was disastrous, but it didn't have to be disastrous.
No, that's right. There's no, I mean, it's because, how will we put it? The way, I mean, I was going to get to this, but I don't know if it'll be clear yet. The way things work, it was not something they should have been thinking about. They had their hands full thinking about beings. And there was nothing wrong with thinking about beings. And just thinking about beings and not thinking about aletheia was not itself inevitably going to lead to bad things. But what it did was leave it open to Plato to begin to misunderstand it, and later people to even further misunderstand it. And in the end, unconcealment disappears, and correspondence is all that's left.
Otherwise, we have Hegel. Right?
What?
Otherwise, we have Hegel, but it was necessarily.
Yes, we don't want Hegel saying that this has to happen this way. Right. He wants to avoid that. Okay, so on 61. I don't know if that's important. It's sort of important, but I made a big deal out of it. He doesn't in this book make a big deal out of it. That what Plato gave us was that the essence of something is the whatness of that thing. And that's the being of beings. And that, I'm reading this last paragraph before the B section. And the being of being turns out to be what is constantly and always present and shows itself and so forth. And only on the basis of this understanding of being as constant self-opening and showing presence is the interpretation of the beingness of beings, and hence the interpretation of being as idea possible. Well, it's a funny story here. He isn't explaining it very much, but I can say a little more about it. I mean, what is it that Plato's getting wrong? And then I'll try to say why he's getting it wrong is because they aren't in the business of thematizing or noticing the clearing, or he couldn't have made this mistake. Or if you want to say mistake, I don't know what to say. Plato has given a certain spin to the ideas, making them, emphasizing that they are constant and purely and eternally, though it doesn't say that, they are always present. And why does he do that? And what's wrong with that? Well, I'm going to skip and try to do it in a different order, to give you a feel for that. Somewhere I talk about that. Let me try to give you a feel for what sort of twist on this is causing a problem. And then we're going to go back and try to find out why Plato was not forced to make this mistake, or this move, but this move isn't blocked because they haven't thematized the clearing. So it's a possibility to be made, and it's something that's natural to be made. Now let me try to tell you sort of what the move is, and why it's natural that he made it, and why he couldn't, I mean, okay, just like that.
What is natural?
It's natural that he emphasizes presence and stability and...
Why is that natural?
Okay. Well, I'm going to tell you. The phenomena will lead you to do it if something doesn't keep you from doing it. That's what I'm going to try to say. First, let me say in what he's done when he's done it. And by thinking about what it would have been like if we treated the work of art the way Plato treats the Eidos, because there is this similarity. What would it be like to put a big emphasis on the presence, or constant and always present character of the work of art? What would you get wrong about the works of art? And he's going to get it wrong about the many works of art in the same way, I think. Well, what would you miss about works of art if you thought that they were constant and always and fully present to the people who lived in the light of them? Well, they would be missing, let me try, that works of art die. That's one of the things you'd be missing. Secondly, you'd be missing that works of art are not clear they're not fully present. You've got earth in them, which is withdrawing and concealed. And so works of art will naturally solicit conflicts of interpretation about what they mean. And all of that is getting lost in the Plato story. I'm going to tell it to you as it looks in houses in a second. Let me just catch up. It would be as if the temple settled, the Greek temple settled once and for all. This is how Plato would have to think about it, and would think about it, and misses so much about it. It would be as if the Greek temple settled once and for all what it was to be a Greek, probably what it was to be a human being, so that anybody who wasn't like that would be an inferior kind of human being, and it wouldn't die, and there'd be no struggle of interpretation. And so now let's try it with the Eidos house. Well, it would be as if this Eidos house, which we have to somehow have before all houses, settled for all time what a house is, once and for all. That's and always and constantly. Then what would that look like? Well, it would be as if any other culture that had sort of tree houses and huts had inferior houses, because we know what a house really is, because we've got the paradigm house, and there couldn't be a struggle of interpretation among architects, say whether you're going to build a house the way, who's the guy, Le Corbusier, who thinks a house is a machine for living, and the more functional and cold and mechanical it is, the better it is. And then Maybach comes along and builds the houses we see out of redwood, is comfortable and is unlike a machine for living and cozy, more like a nest. But you wouldn't have a struggle among architects as to what was a house if Plato was right, because once you had the idea of a house, it would be clear for all times what the best house was, and every other house would be as near it as, would try to be as similar to it as possible. And so the Eidos would settle all debate once and for all. No surprises. It would be totally stable. Okay. Now, I said that's what happens if you go in the Plato direction. And now the question is, well, why would Plato go in that direction? And then I'm going to skip something, but I want to mark it so I know that I've skipped it. Okay. Okay, they were the Greeks now were concerned with beings and not with the clearing, and that's the problem. I guess let me say it first, blurted out in my terms. I mean, if you understood, I've said it once, but you got to keep saying it over and over, that physis itself and aletheia itself and the eidos as some kind of variation on physis, which Plato is proposing, are all produced by the clearing. That is, they are a style that the practices get organized into thanks to the way they tend to gather and thanks to the help of the creator. Then you'd understand that this is not clear and it's not there for all time, that there could be other styles, that this style is covering up other possible styles, that you can't get clear about a style and settle it once and for all. You're going to have a conflict of interpretations. You'd understand all that if you understood that somehow the way the practices were organized in this place, Greece, at this time, 5th century BC, were enabling things to show up with a particular style. Then you wouldn't make the Plato move. That's the idea. But since the Greeks were concerned with being and not with the clearing, everything because they missed the clearing, it was possible. But first, now we're going to ask and why did the Greeks miss the clearing? Were they just stupid? He asks at the top of 104. Why did the Greeks not make aletheia as such a question, rather than, if we may say so, experience it as something obvious, that is, taking it for granted? Was this lack of inquiry a neglect? Did it stem from impotence with regard to original questioning? And the answer is supposed to be no, no. The Greeks were doing exactly what they could do and should do, and it wasn't their job to think about the clearing. This is on page 118, where it says 3. We contend that it was because the Greeks sustained their task that they did not inquire into aletheia as such. Their task was the question, what are beings as such? The manner in which they asked, i.e. answered this question, must make evidence why this question occluded for them the question of aletheia, and why this occlusion was not a restriction of their questioning, but its completion, the sustaining of the first beginning. And that's, so they didn't ask how disclosing Orpheus as a style was possible. Let me, the middle of 119. The Greeks inquired into beings and asked what they as such, what they are as such, and they answered unconcealedness. But this answer is a philosophical one. That means, they thought, if I understand that right, that means the same as a metaphysical one. That means they thought it was a permanent answer. They thought this is the answer. That's what beings are, Fusus. They didn't think, gee, that's the current style. This means it does not finish off the questioning. That is, a philosophical answer doesn't finish off the questioning because it's only said so far, this is the current understanding of being, only it doesn't know that's what it said. So it thinks it's finished off the questioning, but it doesn't. It requires that the question be pursued and unfolded all the more, namely, sort of, what are beings? That's a funny way to put it, but that means sort of, I take it, what is the basic kind of unconcealedness that makes it possible for anything to show up in any style? Yeah?
I might want to try to put it a little bit differently.
Good.
The Greeks didn't act as if it were the answer or weren't the answer. They didn't even think there were answers. Plato is the one who thinks there are answers. And he acts as if this is the answer.
Oh, good, good. That's right. And the reason the Greeks didn't even think it was the answer is, and I was going to do this, and I skipped it, but I come to do it now. It's because something about style or the clearing itself leads them not even to ask the question, is this the answer? Your style is so obvious, so transparent, and so unnoticed. I mean, it's both obvious and hidden because it's pervasive and obvious that you don't even know you've got a style. So you're not going to ask about where did this come from and so forth. The basic understanding of being that they had as species was just absolutely obvious and showed up for them all over, and the idea that they should question it as why do we have this style, or what makes it possible that we have this style, that it even was a style, is invisible to them. Is that what you're saying?
I want to say they didn't even have a style, knowing or thinking of it as a style, or something.
Okay,
that
right.
only
They couldn't
people back
even.
and seen
That's
it
right.
historically. That's why this is the first beginning.
Good.
And they did their
That's
thing.
it. They can't have any, and that's very important, what Forrest is saying. They're in a particularly peculiar situation. We at least can see something, namely that modernity's got a different style than the Middle Ages, because we've got a counter class. We can see, well, we're certainly very totally and radically different. They had heroes and saints, and we've got mature, saints and sinners, and we've got mature and immature, and then you go on and on. You'll never exhaust the difference, but you can at least see that there's a huge difference. But if you had no counter class, if this was the first total style, it wouldn't be a style for the people in it. Because they would be, it's just the way it is. Period. Yes. Do you want to say something more about this? Didn't you have your hand up? Somebody back there. You. Okay.
Well, I sort of think that this paragraph that you just read, and a lot of times we come across the word philosophical, really seems to indicate that philosophical is not metaphysical. Seems like every time.
Oh, well, I thought this one indicated just that. I mean, philosophical. Let me just.
But this answer is philosophical, and that means it does not finish off the question, but on the contrary requires that the question be pursued and unfolded all the more.
Right.
Into its
Yes.
question.
Right.
It's not.
There's something wrong with it. A philosophical answer if you take it the way Heidegger takes it, is the opening for a deeper question. Right. But if you take it as the answer and not opening for a deeper question, then it's, well, I see what you're saying. Wait, let me think. It's philosophical. That means, well, it doesn't, but it finished off the questioning for them. So we're not disagreeing. It's very interesting. Philosophers and metaphysicians say something which they think is, so to speak, the last word on the subject. That's the nature of philosophy and metaphysics. We, looking on it, see that they've left out something absolutely essential, and that they have provided the grounds for further questioning. So now we're not disagreeing, we're looking at the same thing from two sides. So what is it to be philosophical? Well, one thing might be to think you've got the answer and stop the questioning, and that's what I'm calling, let's call that metaphysical. The other thing to be philosophical is to say something which really raises a lot of new questions, only you don't know it, and that's the positive sense of philosophical. Yeah, good. Yeah.
I'm upset by the idea that the primordial Greeks didn't have a style.
Oh, they did? Oh, I see. Well, now you're just disagreeing. I think about where we see they had
they had no shot at seeing that they had a style, whereas we have a shot at it because of it. But that doesn't seem like it in any way shows.
I don't think there's any disagreement between you. Forrest is saying the Greeks couldn't have called what they had a style, right? And you're saying that we can call what they had a style because we can see the counterclass. Because we're historical, and they were the beginning. We agree. But it would be very misleading to say that it wasn't a style. It's that for them it couldn't be understood as a style.
In seeing that it couldn't be understood as a style, we understand better why the Greeks didn't answer the question about data, and that's why it's important to see them.
And why it's not a failing.
Right. Why it's not a failing. Right. But there's something I want to say too, and I'm going to say it right now, about the very phenomenology of a style. That even now that we've got counterexamples, I mean, we view the medievals as having a style and the moderns as having a style, but we know how things are. We may not have a right word for it. I mean, Heidegger tries to find words for it. Let's say what we've got is a notion that physics and technology tell us how things really are, and our job is to get as much sort of control or flexibility, and these are subtleties that I'm not going to go into right now, and get as much of the world sort of ordered as we can. And that's not our style. That's finally getting it right. We can't help thinking about it that way, I think. And so it's not just, the first people are in worse shape, as Forrest says, because they've got no counterclass. They couldn't get themselves out of this way of looking at it, that they've got it. They just got it. But we have to struggle against the phenomenology of style even now. Heidegger, the thinker, has to struggle to get us to see that what we've got is just one more, in his language, mode of revealing later. And I just thought of this sort of crazy example, but it always fascinates me, the phenomenology of style. Just take glasses, these glasses. All of a sudden, everybody's got these steely-rimmed glasses, right? And doesn't it seem that finally we've got it right about glasses? Boy, those clunky plastic glasses they wore in the 50s, those big, heavy glasses, that's not the thing. Glasses should be as invisible as possible so you can see people's eyes. Thank goodness we finally got it right. So everybody was going to go out and buy glasses like this. And we see, in a certain sense, well, that's the next style, and there have been a few in between, that I don't know about you, but I can't help feeling this is it. We got it right. We're going to do it this way from now on. And I can't imagine how there could be any better glasses than the ones I've got on. They got it just right. And when the new ones come along and these look foolish to me, the way the old heavy plastic glasses I had in the 50s and 60s now look embarrassing and foolish to me. You know what I mean, the big, heavy, dark rims and so forth. It will be a big surprise, and I can only do it from within the new one, which will finally look as if it's got it right. I mean, it's a funny feature of any total world-defining something or other.
I think it's more true of the one we're in because we labor under this notion of enlightenment progress.
I suppose, but even the Christians read that, the pagans didn't get it. We got it. The Greeks were lost. And Dante explains how nice they were and how hard they tried, but couldn't get any further than limbo. But anyway, no, we call it progress. They called it paganism. I suppose Another group might have called it stupidity, but everybody's got a story about how they aren't just another style. They've got it right. And that's a funny, funny feature of style that if you're trying to read Heidegger, you've got to fight against it all the time. Now, oh good, let me go. I'm doing this in such a funny order, but that's all right. So the Greeks thought of physis as the basic characteristic of all beings. This is on 119. About 5 lines down. The basic characteristic of standing out and standing over, emerging, self-representing, standing there, rising above, and so forth and so forth. Then the bottom paragraph. The Greeks inquired into beings and asked what they are as such, and they answered unconcealedness. And I've just read that, and it's a philosophical answer. It both says something important, and it covers up something even more important, I think you would say. So, let's see where we are. And that's not... I mean, another way to put it, I mean, the reason it's hard to see, well, there are 2 different points I'm trying to make. Even if you see your style, there are really 3 different points. I think I'll try to sort them out. The phenomenology of style is fascinating. 1, it's invisible. I'm going to read you a passage. Like the illumination in the room. You don't see it at all normally. You just see the objects as something or other, showing up as something or other. Secondly, if you do see your style, you don't see it as a style. You see it as finally getting it right. That's what I just said. And third, even if you saw a style and saw it as a style, you couldn't spell out what it is you'd seen while you were in it. And you can see this, I mean, go back to the Marilyn Monroe example, or the style of feminine beauty. In a certain way, it would be invisible at all, but then thanks to her it gets glamorized, and you see it as a style, but you see it as sort of, now we've got the really paradigm case of feminine beauty. But that doesn't mean that you can remember now rationalize it. It's got this earth side to it. You can't spell out what exactly it is that Marilyn Monroe style is, except by having Marilyn Monroe do it. So there are 3 ways, phenomenologically, where the style goes from being invisible to ungraspable. So no wonder the Greeks missed it. But my favorite one is the bottom of 127. Remember, I keep talking about the illumination in the room. Finally, Heidegger does that. He says at the bottom, now it has been shown finally that the question of the Greeks, the primordial question about beings as such, is of such a kind that it precludes an inquiry into aletheia as such. For unconcealedness, and this is what I was talking about with Forrest, not that there's no counterclass now. That's the other thing I was talking about with Forrest. They're so busy worrying about beings that they aren't going to be thinking about the clearing in which beings show up at all. He says, for unconcealedness is the determination of beings that in general and in advance constitutes the field of view within which becomes possible the manifestation of the characters of beings we mentioned in the fulfillment of the question of beings. That is, that aletheia and physis is taken for granted by them so that they can ask the question about beings. I mean, there is a general characteristic about all beings. If there weren't, they couldn't ask the question about all beings. No other culture could. But they don't concentrate on the general characteristic, the fact that there is this general characteristic as a kind of background. They concentrate on the beings and try to characterize their beingness. In order to bring into view what resides in a visual field, here's the thing, this is my illumination, the story. The visual field itself must precisely light up first, that is, be open, that's all that means, so that it might illuminate what resides within it, that is, so things can show up as something. However, it cannot and may not be seen explicitly. If you saw the illumination in the room, you couldn't see the things in the room. Sure, the room has to light up, you've got to turn on the lights, and then we can see the things in it. And if you imagine the light having a certain color, like as the style, then you can see the things as having this color or that color, but you can't see it. the field of view, aletheia, must, in a certain sense, be overlooked. That's the structural sense in which it withdraws. So they had the task of looking at beings as a whole. That's what the next paragraph says. That's already a great move. No culture before them looked at beings as a whole. They just worried about let's take the Bali ones. They worried about the men and their kind of being, and the women and their kind of being, and the animals and their kind of being, and the gods and their kind of being. They didn't worry about being as a whole. So the Greeks had a great new task. But what they couldn't worry about when they were there in the midst of being as a whole, thinking about beings as a whole, was the clearing that made them able to experience beings as a whole and as something. Okay, I think that's a very important thing to get clear. Let's see. There's an interesting further point that if they had understood that they had a style, and if they had set out to try to describe their style, it would have been very bad for them. Because when you try to describe your style and rationalize it, you banalize it. So there's my slogan is, sort of with, you could take Marilyn Monroe, the work of art glamorizes the style, and everybody can see it. If they don't see it as a style, at least they see everything in terms of this glamorized object. But if you then try, say, in women's magazines to list what the things she wears and does and how she acts that makes her so glamorous, then you will lead to this banalizing where everybody tries to look like Marilyn Monroe, and there are a million sort of mock Marilyn Monroes, and instead of sort of furthering the style, it waters it down. I think that's what he's saying on 120, the top paragraph. To inquire into aletheia, to question aletheia with itself within the circuit in the direction of primordial questioning, would mean to debilitate the answer as well as the questioning. That is, they were smart enough not to try to spell out the understanding of being. They said it was aletheia, they said it was physis, but they didn't ask more. For as strange as it may sound, the greatest debilitation of essential questioning does not consist in being drawn into something more original, but in being hardened into its own obviousness, petrified and degraded into a formula which may be passed from everyone to everyone. And in fact, the moment aletheia began to relinquish its primordial essence, that is, unconcealedness, in favor of the correctness it itself founds, in this decisive moment, this preparation takes place in Plato's thinking. The great philosophy of the Greeks comes to an end. Yeah?
Yeah, I would suggest that that's exactly what Plato, who was very preoccupied with pre-Socratics, was doing. He was trying to understand their style.
That's what I think too.
That's where it all went.
That begins to banalize it.
Yes.
If you could tell a story and spell out what idea and eidos was and its properties, namely presence and stability, and it's a system, Plato says, and all this stuff, then at that point you're already in danger of undermining the whole thing. It has to work in this sort of background way, unthematized, the style, to work at its best. And that's how it was for the pre-Socratics. Yes?
Can we, I'm thinking of this, Thomas is okay to think of this in terms of earth and world before. That sounds like the winning out of the worldly aspect over the earthly
Good.
aspect.
Yes, that's right. That is what would it be for the world to win out, to spell it out, to make it clear, consistent, and complete, if that may be too enlightenment the way to put it, to at least to say as much as you can about it. How does he put it?
At least make it transparent.
Make it transparent. Right. And make it clear. Plato was sort of he was trying to make it clear that what you should do is make it clear. And that, in fact, the way things are at their best is clear. And clear is just all over the place in Plato. What I'm calling clear, Heidegger's calling present. You want to make it pure present. Remember, world equal present equal clear, and earth equal absent, withdrawn, absent is type of challenge, not absent, withdrawn, withholding, refusing, unclear. And then when you get rid of it, all you get is sort of banal statements. I'm thinking of Terry Malick saying about his movies, if you try to explain what the Thin Red Line is about, all you would be able to say were banalities. Because what and he doesn't say this, but it's the mood, it's the style in the movie, not anything you could say about it, which is what's great about it. Okay, one more thing now. We're just about there. So the Greeks, for all these reasons we've been talking about, didn't and couldn't and shouldn't be asking about the clearing. This is on 124. About this third sentence of the bottom full paragraph. It's now clear that this lack of questioning originated out of the necessity to present, to preserve, and to unfold once and for all beings in their beingness. And this couldn't be some kind of conscious choice, he says at the top of 125. This is interesting too. It's related to the earth and clarity story from another angle. The last thing they could be doing is making a clear, conscious choice to present and preserve being in their beingness. Because anything important can't be a clear, conscious choice. I'm going to stop with this, but let me read this. For everything, the top of 125, for everything necessary that is supported by a known goal is already tainted in its unconditionality and purity. That means if you just choose some goal and try to explicitly achieve it, that's not what a really serious decision or, well, action is like. The necessary in its greatest form always exists without the crutches of the why and the wherefore, and without the support of the whereto and the thereto. Now, that all sounds pretty mysterious. I'm going to read you something equally mysterious, and then I'll tell you what it means. I skipped over this important and interesting moment in The Origin of the Work of Art, where he's talking about the earth and why it's important and fruitful, when he says on 55, below the middle, every decision bases itself on something not mastered, something concealed and confusing, else it would never be a decision. You see, that's the same thought. Now, what does that mean? That means you've got to make real decisions out of what matters to you in a way that you can't get clear about and decide about that. Because you've got to make a decision out of something. If you could get everything clear, here's the opposite. Suppose you could get everything clear and make decisions about your most basic way of acting. Then you would have no reason for choosing one way of acting rather than another. You'd have all these values or possibilities laid out in front of you, and you'd have to make an absurd choice. This is what Sartre gets to, because he thinks everything is clear. He's the disastrous end of this tradition, one of the disastrous ends. And if everything were laid out as clear, and if your decision was completely rational and explicit, it would be completely absurd. It's only on the basis of some mattering that you can't grasp a matter, the earth, that a decision can have seriousness for you. That something, it's one way to put it is, really serious decisions aren't decisions. Something grabs you as something you have to do. It's not something you decide and choose. And that's a general view Heidegger has. And if the earth is gone and you only have world, then all your decisions will become trivial and absurd, because there won't be anything out of which you decide. Everything will be in front of you to choose between. And he says, of course, the Greeks were not choosing to do their Greek thing, but it was out of this deep distress and need. We're going to get there next time. Out of this basic mood in which things desperately mattered to them in a way that they had to understand the being of all beings, that they did this, and thereby it was a real decision. You want to say something? No, go ahead. You get the last word.
Well, it seems like there are two things about the decision mattering. One is where the mattering comes from, and then the other is there needs to be some unclarity in order for a decision need to be made, right? I mean, for there to be some sort of viable conflict. If it's just rationally,
I
totally
suppose.
transparent, you just march down that.
Okay, I see. Yes. If it was obvious what you should do in terms of some values you'd already obviously chosen,
Totally
you just do it.
transparently work.
So it can't be obvious. It's got to be so confusing. And if it were obvious on the basis of what you decided what to do, then it would be absurd and wouldn't matter.
Yeah.
So it's got to be doubly out of what's not clear. That's again the fruitful function of Earth. It's coming up here. Okay, we have to stop with that. We're ready to go on to. But let me just say now, I got to just where I wanted to get. Now the question is, well, what is this mattering, unclear, deep problem that drove the Greeks to do this thing that nobody had ever done before? Come up with the being of all. Think of the totality of beings and what they all show up as, or what they all are. Namely, that they all show up. Okay.